Hello, guys and girls. Bored now, back with you on this video. Okay, Keith, this is Rachel McDonald. Hey, Rachel.
Hey Keith, how you going?
I'm okay, thank you. Thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me
So,
again.
our second week of doing horror reviews together. So, we've done one review, which was the Fear Street trilogy, which was last week. So, you can find that video up on the channel. And this is sort of the plan for a while to do like franchises or trilogy, anything horror related. But I think that'll be the focus for a while. And this week, because again it feels quite sort of current, we're going to be doing all three of the Conjuring movies, back on the series so far, if you like, and then to look at the new one. And we'll see what we think of it overall, the three movies, and give them individual scores. And at some point, we will do the other movies, like the spin off movies, but we'll wait a bit before we do them. But I don't really have to do much of a setup. I'm guessing most people will know, but the original two movies directed by James Wan, who has a bit of a past with like Final Destination and various movies, and sort of very loosely based on true events, as these horror movies tend to be. But the two main characters are at least based on real characters: Ed and Lorraine Warren, Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga. They were famous demonologists. I think that's the term.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
experts on the supernatural. And so the way the movies tend to pan out is that they're always helping some like family or some person who have problems with demons or ghosts, supernatural type things, attacking their house, and it's up to the Warrens essentially to come in and figure out what the problem is and how to deal with it. And you also get a bit about their personal lives as well, and I guess their past with this stuff and how it affects them as people and their relationship as well. And that particularly, I think, comes into it in the second one even more so. And you get some mythology building along the way because, of course, there have now been these spin-offs, various spin-offs.
Yeah.
So sort of individually, they all have similar plots. So there's not that much difference in the plot. It normally involves sort of a house that's sort of haunted in some way, and it's about halfway through where the Warrens kind of hear about the case and they sort of come in, because you tend to have their stuff as well alongside the other stuff. I'll just ask Rachel, if is this a franchise you're particularly invested in? How do you feel overall?
In case you haven't, The Conjuring is not. It was. I genuinely enjoy the films. I love haunted houses. I love supernatural horror. Is one of my favorite subgenres of horror. But it's interesting. It's a trilogy. It's a film franchise that when I first watched them, I really loved the movies. I loved the first one. I loved the second one, and then I kind of just forgot about them for a while until the third one came out and until the spin-offs came out. So it was kind of like you watch them and they're really good in the moment, but they're not movies I revisit that often. And it might just be because they're a little bit more involved. You have a lot of other horror movies like slashers and stuff. You can kind of just throw them on in the background and just rewatch them and enjoy them. This one, I think you have to really sit down and immerse yourself in the movie. And so it's not, you don't rewatch it too often. So, but I know that you have recently rewatched the first one after only having seen it like once before when it first came out. So I'm very interested to see how you found that, given, that it's so fresh in your mind.
Yeah, because these have been around a while now. It was 2013, the first film, so close to a decade, which seems crazy. Time flies.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
But yeah, I went to the cinema to see it at the time, and then for whatever reason, I didn't see the second one at the time. So I mean, I went back this week and watched it, and obviously saw the third one this week. As though as I was saying to you off air, I sort of went 3, 1, 2, which I'm similar in a way. I'd certainly with the first one at least, because that until this week that was the only one I'd seen. With the first one, probably just based on that, I didn't have massive connection to the franchise. I remember first time around enjoying that well enough, then it was quite a well made film. I sort of thought bits of it was generic, and that's kind of what lets it down.
Okay.
Obviously, I think what partly makes these films, before we really get into it, is, Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga, because they are really believable as that couple, and they're both really good actors. And if you are going to get like emotionally invested in the films as such, I think they're the reasons really.
Yeah,
Then
I definitely agree. I think they have really good chemistry. The actual Warrens and what they did, I don't really believe in that sort of
yeah,
stuff. But I think for the characters they wanted to create for this movie and the characterization they wanted to give them, you're right. It's very easy to become invested in them and invested in their story. And I think the third movie in particular, when we get into it, really leans on their relationship even more so than it does on the actual haunting in the story. It's more about like where their relationship is at, which is fine. And I do feel, again, with the third movie, they very much carried it because we're very invested in their storyline now. So I think they are cast really well, and I think that they work very well with each other as husband and wife, and they have a good chemistry, and you really feel that they are a loving, caring couple who genuinely believe in what they're doing and helping people. And I also like to see their dynamics with the families, especially in the first and the second movies, when they move in with the families and they become very attached to the kids and they genuinely want to help. And you get the feeling that they really want to help because they care about these people, not because they're trying to prove anything or make money. It's because they see this family in need and they know that they can help them. And I know that there's a scene in the first movie where, excuse you, I'm sorry, this is Carmilla. She wants to join in. Oh dear, I was wondering when one of
was
them was
like
going to
a
make
whole
an
in
appearance.
itself. Yeah.
But yes, I remember a scene in the first movie where Lorraine is talking about how they have to help this family because she feels their pain and she can feel the terror that they're going through. And I think that's a really interesting angle to put on these movies, but especially, horror movies. You don't always have great characterization. You don't always have great characters to latch onto. So I think these films did that quite well. And the first movie, I particularly as well, I really like the family with the five girls. And I think they build them up quite well, their
Yeah.
dynamics, the sisters' dynamics, and seeing the family kind of be put under pressure by this haunting and to have to see what they go through. I think you really do feel for these people, this situation that they're in, and you feel very sorry for them and you want them to get out of this situation, as opposed to some movies where you just kind of want to see the characters die because they're so annoying. You don't get that so much in these films. At least for me, I found the characters in these films, at least the first two, very endearing.
They are the big selling point, because I think obviously with it being a horror film and that's the premise, then you kind of have to go with it anyway, putting aside your real life beliefs. And
Yes.
films themselves, they do make them likable, they do make them engaging. So I mean, obviously, for example, there's that scene in the second one where they're kind of being mocked, aren't they, on TV by that
Yes.
doctor. And putting aside your real, whether you believe in ghosts or not, you actually feel bad for them, and you do feel, yeah, that guy's a bit of a dick, because these are sincere people and it's their belief. And and obviously he was being quite demeaning to like the victims as well in that case, saying they were like making stuff up. And so yeah, I think the films maybe are at their best because of the Warrens at times, because you are invested and you do believe in them as characters. But yeah, we'll talk roughly what we think about the first film. So I have similar sort of feelings as I did at the time. Then it's a good film, maybe not a great film. Then it is maybe partly let down by the generic sort of moments. I think because it obviously follows quite a traditional haunted house pattern, then maybe you're going to get those moments that it builds to, where it does throw quite a lot at the screen and quite a lot is going on at times. Everything like totally worked. I think maybe it was going to be hard for it not to fall into generic sort of scares, like set piece scares, moments where maybe it's just this build up of things that just becomes a bit too much, and that they fall back on the CGI as well. And again, it's a bit of a problem sometimes. Supernatural, okay, with ghosts and stuff. I can understand a bit more using CGI, but you're sort of walking a tightrope where, yeah, sometimes it does stand out. Good scares in it. I think it's generally a well-directed movie by one. I like the period stuff. I think he captures the period very well, because the bulk of it is set in the 70s. We do start in the 60s, sort of introduce the Annabelle sort of subplot, if you like. Yes, actually, I will ask you why we're on that sort of subject, but do you think, looking back, because we've now had these spin-offs, do you think they were planned at the time? Do you think like they were introducing them because they knew, or do you think they were just...
No, I didn't get that feeling. I think they just wanted. I actually really love the Annabelle opening. I think it's a great way to open the film, and I think it's a great way to establish what the Warrens do and who they are, and the kind of world they live in. Because I particularly love that they're brought to these people who think they're being haunted, and they point out, they say, no, your doll is not haunted. Your doll is the conduit through which this being is trying to get to you. It's a demonic force. And I think that very nicely sets up the demonic force in the movie, and showing that it's not always just a standard haunting. It's not always just this thing is haunted. It's that these beings can use these objects to kind of work through. So I think that when they first did that, they were just bringing it in because the Annabelle doll is a real doll. It's supposed to be a real thing. And so I'm guessing it's probably something that if you know about the Warrens, you know about the Annabelle doll. So they put this scene in so that people who already knew about the Warrens could have that kind of reference and kind of be familiar with that world. So, because I don't think they knew how big this film was going to be. I think with all films, it's always a gamble. You make a movie just hoping for the best. So I think what happened is they had this great opening, this ominous opening, and creepy dolls are always effective, especially for me. I find dolls very creepy. Dolls, puppets, masks, any kind of inanimate object that's not supposed to move and does is very creepy. And so they used it to establish the world, to establish the Warrens. And then when the movie became so popular, they saw this opportunity to then create the spin-off. So yeah, I don't think it was planned, but I do think it was a very effective opening. I really love the opening of the first Conjuring. I think that whole scene with Annabelle is really great. And the Annabelle doll is freaking terrifying. So yeah. And then of course it ties in at the end when the demon tries to use the Annabelle doll to get to their daughter. Again, the Warren Museum is apparently a real museum with supposedly cursed items. So again, that's another nod. But I really like the first film. I'm always a sucker for a good haunting. I'm always a sucker for a movie set in the 70s. So that's a great combination for me. I do understand what you're saying about generic scares, but I think that the film is for me, it was so engrossing and so interesting that it didn't really spoil my enjoyment of it. I thought there was some really effectively creepy parts. I thought there was some really subtle creepiness that I really enjoyed, such as the daughter who sleepwalks, or the mother waking up with bite marks and bruises on her body. This thought
that's pretty disturbing. Yeah,
I know, right? It's this thought that this entity could be latching itself to you and attaching itself to you and like sucking the energy from you. I think that's a very creepy, very foreboding concept, and I think that the film did that really well. And I liked that sometimes I like a good haunted house cliche, cold rooms, a bit of windy ghost, storm, stuff like that. I do understand why sometimes they can feel generic, but I think if they're well executed, you can kind of get around the fact that it's a generic scare. And I think that The Conjuring is very well filmed. I think James Wan's direction is so good. The way he establishes the setting, the long shots he does through the house, the use of like light and shadow, it's very effective. The Conjuring is one of those films that actually does creep me out. Like if I watch it late at night with all the lights off, I do actually find it quite creepy. So I did. Yeah, I really do enjoy them. So were there like particular scenes that you were finding cliched, or was it just kind of the overall tone of the ghost story that you found a little bit, a little bit old hat?
enjoy ghost stories as well, and I do enjoy the atmosphere of them and what they can do. And this one, I do like how deep they go into like mythology and stuff. I mean, you said it about them talking about the demonic, and I really like actually that description near the start of the film because that sets things up. And also they set rules which I sort of like as well. I mean, quite in more in the second film maybe, but this one sort of basic stuff which works well. I like the fact that the Annabelle doll is in the case. I sort of like, and you kind of know she's gonna end up getting
Yeah.
out at some point, but that's part of it being a horror movie. But
Mm.
I do like the fact that this is a serious deal. Like, don't take her out of the case.
Yes.
Just be this modern thing because obviously in the past, I think you've had great ghost stories where they've worked so well. There is no CGI, and because it's more about what you don't see and the suspense of
Oh,
it.
definitely.
With this, it's maybe just because there is a lot going on, and because I just think naturally these films have to build to these moments. So maybe in a way it's not so much one's fault, but like maybe I think his direction is really good. I would agree with that. It may just be the fact that these films at some point have to show their hand.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying because there were scares I really liked. It cast the family really well. Like
Yeah.
Lily Taylor, really good actress, played the mother. But
Yes, she was
I
very
think
good.
as it went on, it just got a bit more hit and miss with the quality of, you know,
Yeah.
because there were some good ones with her, like the Bruise one. I think that's a good point because that can be applied to particularly maybe being a female and being sometimes isolated in the house, and you know,
Definitely.
I think that can be a metaphor for like anxiety in real life. You know,
Mm.
I did like the hide and seek stuff with the girl.
Yes.
And I
Mm.
did like, you know, the sort of clapping in the dark and the way it appeared behind her at one
Yeah.
point. And just the fact that Miguel wasn't there and she said, you know, what was it? She sort of said and she
That
already
she
hit.
was elsewhere. Yes, she'd
Yeah,
already
but
hidden
she
somewhere else.
so the
Yeah. No,
mother assumed she was in the closet.
that was a
Like,
great moment. That's like a fairly iconic shot from the scene where she's on the stairs
yeah.
and the hands come out from behind her. And again, just a very interesting way of putting a scare in. I do admit there were like, and again, you're going to get this with horror with haunted houses. There were some jump scares where you're like, yeah, okay, this is very obviously leading to a jump scare, because I think jump scares in general are hard to do because audiences are so used to them now. So I prefer the moments where there's just a lot of tension, but it just kind of keeps you on the edge of your seat. And there's no, sometimes I like it when you just have tension without payoff. You just kind of very, 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 very tense. And then it's like it doesn't quite let up. And I feel like this movie has quite a few moments like that. You mentioned before about not seeing things, like it's scarier when you don't see anything, like what you imagine always is always worse than what's on the screen. And that's one of the reasons that I think the opening scene is so effective, because you never actually see the damn doll move. It's just sitting there looking creepy.
Yeah.
And then you just hear the knocking and all of a sudden it's appeared at their bedroom door, but you never actually see the damn thing move. And I actually think that is so much creepier than if we were to see it actually move its head or move an arm or something like that. Like, it's the unseen is always scary, which is why I do find the climax of the film a little over the top when she finally gets
Yeah.
fully possessed by Bathsheba and she's screaming and she's vomiting up blood and they're following her under the house, and it was a
Yeah.
very, very big over the top ending to what had up until then been a very quiet, low key movie. And I feel like the second movie leads into its climax a bit better than the first movie does, where we have
Yeah.
these instances of the girl sleepwalking and maybe some mysterious figures being seen and some clapping in the dark. And then all of a sudden we're dealing with a full on possession of, the mother being possessed, and she's screaming and she's turning upside down. So I do find that when I get to the climax of the film, I do start to feel a bit fatigued. Like, okay, let's
Yeah.
wrap it up. We spent 15 minutes on this exorcism, but let's move along a little bit. So
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's one of my big things with the first film is then Yeah, it's definitely OTT. It's very in your face, and it does take you out of the moment in many ways. I think sometimes maybe in some ways, especially after The Exorcist, and you've had various like exorcism films. I think maybe unless it's done really well, I'm maybe just a bit done with that side of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it like in these films where they're just like it's a bit more upmarket, a bit more money into it, and I think they're just trying too hard to be like another version of that. I think
Yeah.
the
Mm.
climax was maybe that's a good example of actually where it didn't really work, and it was yeah, you need to calm down a bit.
Yeah. And for
But
me, that lets the movie down because otherwise I would give the movie like like a quite a very, very high rating because I actually think it's a very effective movie. But I figure we'll rank everything at the end.
okay,
So if we move on to number two,
yeah,
which is I have to say I the Enfield Poltergeist, which is again a very famous haunting that happened
yeah,
in I think the
70.
80s. I think this one's set in the
I
80s
think it's
in
late 70s.
late 70s. Okay,
Yeah.
so very late 70s. And in England, and I remember watching some behind. I was watching some behind the scenes for The Conjuring because they put up all this stuff on YouTube with the release of the most recent movie, and they were saying how they really liked being able to move to England because they were able to get a completely different tone and feel off the movie. You know, the
Mm,
color palette changed, the pop culture references changed, even the fashion and all the settings changed. They
yeah.
were talking about how they went from this big, sprawling, American kind of farmhouse to this English house they had to work around the new set, and it gave them new things to do, and they were very excited about the setting. And I have to admit that does work a lot for the second because it helps to set the movie apart from the first one, give it its own identity and its own tone and its own feel. And the fact that this case was so much more famous than the first case, I mean, even I knew like lots about the Enfield Poltergeist when that movie came out. And I think they do, I
Okay.
find the second one really interesting in the way they set it up as a traditional haunting. So you think it's this old ghost Bill who is an old resident of the house. And I love the eventual reveal that it's not Bill, that it's the demonic force using Bill. And I think that again ties into the opening Annabelle scene where you learn that these entities can use
Yeah.
other entities, can use other conduits to get their messages across and to create this kind of havoc and terror. And Valak I find her terrifying. Something
Mm,
about religious imagery is really
yeah.
scary. So I completely understand why she became so popular, why she got her own spin-off, why Valak has become kind of the iconic
Yeah.
um, bad guy from these films. So what did you think? Have you seen the second one before?
No, this was my first time actually.
Okay. How did you
Um,
go? What did you think?
I agree. I'm with you. I thought the second one was really good. I think definitely a step up. Because yeah, I thought in terms of horror and it being scary, a step up. I think in terms of the plot, a bit more original. It didn't feel so much like the traditional, like way you would do one of these films.
Yeah.
You had the plots working side by side, and I did like the extra focus on the Warrens and how it was building up their relationship, their drama, and again the mythology. And I think probably that's one of the big selling points of these films is the fact that they are really going quite detailed into some of these like spirits and demons, whatever you want to say, and they're going quite because obviously the style of these films, they obviously have this very like docky drama type feel, these like true life crime story type feels that we now are quite common for us to see, but probably when they did the first film back in 2013 it wasn't such a big thing. And I think they're definitely hinting at like some stuff that was obviously now is common, like sort of true life crime or true horror type podcasts.
Yeah.
I think the way it gets into the media side of things in the second film is definitely
Yes.
hinting at some of that. So that stuff is all good. That stuff with the Warrens, I like how it creates stakes, sort of thing, because obviously you have this sort of plot where Lorraine is having visions of what potentially could happen to them. I mean, first of all, she has visions of the past with this Amityville house and the murders there, which that scene was very scary, actually, very freaky.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, I really liked that scene. And again, another famous case that they managed to tie in.
yeah, and I think they do that stuff well. It doesn't really feel jarring, which can sometimes happen. That couple, I think you're really invested, and the fact that at one point it's a big part of the film, really. She believes that if they take on any more cases, potentially it could lead to it. She obviously sees a vision of Ed being killed.
Yes.
So because you care about these characters, because you know them, it creates stakes for, like, I mean, we'll get to it, but obviously the big finale of that film, which is Ed potentially being in danger, him actually going it alone and
Yes.
putting
Yeah.
himself in danger. So that's sort of good storytelling, because that had been set up early in the film. Actually, this is probably a UK thing, so I will go back to you talking about it being set in the UK and stuff, because I think I agree with you. It was a good move because it's distinct from the first film, and I like that they are doing different periods or different locations and stuff. The accents were a bit jarring. It did feel like cliche, Cockney or posh British schoolboy type. I mean, I always enjoy hearing people say wanker. I mean, when the children were swearing, but yeah, this felt like they were American actors trying to
Oh, okay.
either that or just that they were really British, but there's just something about it where it came off as stereotypical.
A little
Like,
too put on, like let's amp up the
yeah,
British accents, make it. Yes, well, obviously I'm not great with accents, so unless it's like a really bad British accent, I'm just kind of like unless it's Keanu Reeves and Dracula, I'm just kind of like, yeah, okay, that sounds passable to me. But I do understand, like I feel the same if I'm watching a film and there's an Australian accent and it's very obviously not an Australian, and you're just like, what are you doing? So I get that. Like whenever you watch a film that's set in your own country or with your own accents that's outside of America, you do always feel a little bit more kind of critical of that. So that's interesting that the accents are that, because yeah, I watch it and I'm just like, yeah, this sounds British to me. That sounds close enough.
yeah.
I do know.
The mother's
Oh,
accent.
she is an Australian actress, actually, the mother. And I do know that the main girl, the girl who gets possessed by Bill, she's an American actress doing an English accent.
I
So
sort of
apparently
suspected
not very
that.
well.
I wasn't sure. I sort of recognised them, but it's credit to the film because I soon got past that. There were one or two moments where it still stood out, but overall I was sort of basically into the drama and the horror of the film. So it actually, after a while, it didn't bother me. And again, I think they do work in some of the politics of the era very well. Basic stuff in a way, maybe if you come from the UK. Still, I thought it captured the era quite well in the UK because I wasn't around then. But well, I sort of no, I was not.
No, a little bit before your
I
time.
came along a bit later, yeah, but
Yeah.
but no, it did felt sort of authentic up to a point anyway. It was good enough, I would say.
Oh, that's good.
Because there's even I mean, it's sort of this maybe was a joke. The bit when the when like the ghost changes the channel and it goes on to Margaret Thatcher,
Yeah.
and that's an evil spirit when it insists on changing channel to Margaret
Yeah.
Thatcher. I'm not surprised that freaked the girl out.
Yeah. I don't think that would freak anyone out.
Yeah.
You're suddenly watching TV and all of a sudden there's Margaret Thatcher. Yeah, very scary. But speaking of scary, I do feel that this movie amped up the scares a bit more than the first one. The first one was very much like kind of an atmospheric, kind of slow burn, whereas this we We got more imagery with Valek, of course, with Lorraine having the dreams. As you mentioned, the opening scene at Amityville, that was very, very well done. I thought that was a very effective scene with Lorraine walking around and the gunshots, and all of a sudden you'd see the dead bodies. And of course, the Amityville horror being such a well-known case, people know the horror that actually did happen in that house. I also like the little reference where they take the photo in the Amityville. It's a reference to a supposedly famous photograph, again I use air quotes, of that was supposedly taken at Amityville that was since proven to be a fake, as you know they most always are. But I appreciated that reference. I was like, okay, again, if you know the Amityville case, if you know a little bit about like true horror crime, then that was a nice reference. And I thought that, again, I think the setting in England really helped with the scares, because you were able to have a very gloomy atmosphere, lots of rain, lots of cloud, lots of blue tones and darker tones. And I have to say that the Bill ghost was very creepy, with his deep voice telling the girls to get out of his house. And I also really liked, there's one particular scene where the girls are in their bedroom, and the older one, there's like a face behind her on the wall, and then it turns out to be a poster. But I thought that was very well done, because you're watching it, you're like, oh my god, there's someone actually there, and they turn the lights on. I was like, oh, okay, it's just a poster, all right. But it was a very like tense moment. And then of course you had new characters like what's he called, the creepy thin man, that's Charlie's Angels, Slender Man. He looks like Slender Man.
I forget the name, because they're talking about doing a spin-off.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to work. But I did find him effectively creepy. But again, we're leaning on CGI with him. And I think, especially now that the movie is several years old, there are a couple of scenes with the creepy Jack Skellington dude that, for me, I was like, okay, that's very obviously CGI. And it took me out of the moment, because it was...
Yeah, it was a weaker moment, because generally the scares were very good in this movie, and even more effective than the first movie, and more consistent. But that moment I wasn't so keen on. It might just be a case of them maybe just throwing too many different like characters or demons in there, and I agree that did come across very sort of CGI, and just maybe just one that we didn't need so much.
No, because you didn't really add much to the story. We already had Bill, we already had Valek. Adding another one, it was like, it just became too crowded. And when you have too many creatures, then it's like you can't really concentrate on the ones that are actually scary. Like I said, Valek scares the crap out of me. I think she's terrifying. And I think that but I do think that the lead up to the end of this movie, so we talked about how in the first movie the climax was not great. I think the climax of this movie was much better, and was much better executed. And like you said, the climax of this film very much hinges on, is Ed going to die? Because obviously, like you said, Lorraine has been having these visions all movie. You find out that her previous vision that we heard about in the first movie, where she went catatonic for 8 days, was because she saw Ed die. So I think that the stakes at the end of this movie were much higher than the first one, because you actually felt a real sense of danger when Ed is hanging out of the window and he's holding the girl's hand, and they're about to fall. I remember when I first saw this movie, I actually thought he might die. I was like, this is very, very tense. And so I thought that the climax of this movie was much better executed, especially because Valek had been built up as such a big threat the whole movie. Again, we'd seen so many scenes of her. You had Lorraine's dream. You had the scene where she was behind Bill and she was screaming, go away. And she's been built up the whole time. So when you finally have that big confrontation with the wind blowing and people falling out windows and everything like that, it just feels
dramatic.
It's very, very dramatic. They do like drama.
What has come before, and I think Wilson definitely hams it up quite nicely, but it works in the context of what's happening. But it's I think it's part of the film as well. Then there's a bit of hammerness, and you quite enjoy it for that. But definitely stakes, because there's this quite interesting sort of fake out where at one point it makes it look like they might have been pretending, or we know they're not, but there's sort of just this term where they sort of shoot shoot a video or something, and it sort of
Yes.
reveals that.
They get the footage of the girl
Yeah.
wrecking the kitchen by herself. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, that's quite an interesting sort of term because it obviously takes the Warrens away for a moment. And I guess that just makes it more meaningful when they do come back later, because at that point their sort of attitude is, well, even one example of this, it looks sort of bad with the church in a way, or
Yes.
with the media if this sort of thing gets out.
I remember when I first watched the film wondering, okay, so what's going on? Did she really fake the whole thing? Yeah, it was interesting.
Funny stuff with like the media guy with the interview stuff,
Yeah.
his voice and stuff. When he's talking to like the demon through the cow is pretty funny. Because she's like he's like, no, you don't live here or something.
Yeah.
Who are you? And then she does the knock knock bit, and he sort of plays along with her.
Yeah.
And he's actually quite an interesting character because by the end of the film, you actually do quite like him. You actually think he is sincere. Whereas for a long time, I just thought he was like an opportunist sort of thing, just taking advantage. I don't know if like he had a change of heart later where he saw how serious it was, but yeah, he definitely by the end of the film was sort of a bit more likable. But
yeah, and that's always good when you have a character that goes through that sort of development, so that by the end of the movie you can kind of take a step back and go, okay, all right, you're not so bad, you're doing okay now.
The direction when it comes to the horror stuff is really well done. There's some quite subtle like slow tracking shots and some good, like when you'll see something at the end of the hallway but you see it off in the distance. I'm thinking there's quite a good one where she just looks at like the tent or something like in the background, and then she like goes and lays down, and then I really like how the toy truck or whatever it was then came into shot.
Yes. Yeah.
Like the sirens went off. That was a pretty cool moment.
Sometimes it's just something like that. Like I think that horror movies, sometimes they forget that sometimes less is more. Again, it's always like your imagination is always so much worse than anything that can be shown on screen. So when you have small moments like that of a truck just like a toy truck just coming out by itself, or a doll just suddenly showing up at your doorstep, or just like these little, or even I always like the moment in Lorraine's dream where she sees Valak for the first time and Valak just kind of slowly just walks out the door, and it's just little moments like that are just so effective because they just leave so much up to your imagination. And I think that this film was really good with the scares, and it didn't seem to have as many jump scares. It didn't seem to rely as much on those from my memory, and I think just the fact that the villains in this one were a lot scarier. Valak is a lot scarier than Bathsheba was, and so again, religious imagery is always just really scary.
And that particularly the scene where she like Lorraine sees her in the vision is that's really well done, because like she sees again, it's in the shadow, she sort of looks at her, and then the next thing she knows, like she's part of like the painting or something. They use like a Christmas song, don't they, for that? I think it's for that scene, and that's really clever because of the religious angle as well. It's that thing of making this more what's meant to be a more friendly like Christmas type song, twisting it around into something quite sinister. So
I always like when movies do that, when you take something that I mean, I think that's why children work so well in horror films. It's why children's toys work so well, because there are these objects and these things that are supposed to be innocent, that are supposed to be happy and pure, and when you make them evil and you turn them on their heads, you get very creeped out. So I agree. The Christmas music worked really well. The religious imagery works really well. The doll. I think this franchise is full of so many iconic, iconic characters and imagery. Everyone knows Annabelle. Everyone knows Valak. Even Bill, the crooked man. Like all of these images have become so iconic, and I think that's the mark of like a really great, that they've come up with these really great villains and these really great bad guys to work. Because horror films, you always remember the bad guys. So if your bad guy has become like a horror icon, I think that's a great indication that you've created a really great bad guy. And Valak and Annabelle in particular have become so iconic. I think that just speaks speaks to the strength of these films and how they've managed to create these scary figures that people obviously still remember like almost a decade later.
Recent years, I've gone to Fright Fest in the UK.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I volunteered there, which is really good experience.
Oh,
But yeah, there's this regular who goes there who, like, on every day of the festival, he dresses up as a different horror character. And on one of the days, he dressed up as like the nun, as that character. So I think
that
that's
is so cool.
it sort of cements that status in a way
Mm.
as like a horror icon, because obviously other days, like one day he came as Chucky, and there was I think he came as Jason at one point.
Oh,
So
nice.
it's sort of it does say something, the fact that he also chose that character alongside
Mhm.
his established like horror icons. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
very
a
good.
good
Yeah.
example.
Second movie, very, very good. The third movie, on the other hand, let's talk about The
Different.
Devil Made Me Do It. I saw it at the cinema a few weeks ago, but I believe you watched it just in the last week and were not too impressed. So
No.
let's hear your thoughts on that
Okay,
one.
so let's just say different directors. So I think that's part of the difference. Yeah.
Mhm.
Michael Chavs, who also did The Curse of La Llorona, he directed that,
Ah,
which we'll
okay.
get to.
Mhm.
I don't think he knows how to direct horror. I think that's the problem. Some of his direction outside of those scenes was sort of fine. I didn't think there was much wrong with maybe the direction outside of the horror moments, but the actual horror moments, yeah, I just thought he just didn't have it. I thought there was a lot of like really annoying, like slow motion shots that he just did too many times, and he
Mm.
just over egged it to the point where it just stood out as trying to be quite cool and edgy, and not really adding a lot. There wasn't a lot of atmosphere. I think one of my pet peeves with maybe modern movies, particularly horror movies, and it stood out in this one, is nearly every scene is in like darkness, like almost
No, I hear you.
literally every scene. It doesn't make any sense, and it's this obsession that they think if you make it like really really dark in every scene, that makes it scary. No, that's not the way it works.
I was
You know,
literally just talking about this with a friend. Sorry, I interrupted you. You keep going.
yeah, and it takes you out the film, because obviously in the earlier films we liked the fact that you had a sense of a period style.
Mm,
You obviously followed these characters because you do need that as a way into the characters in the film, and then you can like go to the darker stuff and the horror stuff later. But in this, I think every scene looks pretty much the same, and I think that's part of the problem, is there's no distinct style to it.
mm,
Because in the earlier films, even if they were like horror wise not very good at all, you could at least give them some points for that. But in this, I can't really. It fails as a horror movie, and it fails as just a movie which looks convincing, almost looks sort of realistic, and it doesn't have a distinct sort of style. I don't know why they do this in modern. It happens a lot in horror, but I think modern movies in general, I think a lot of blockbusters, they sort of do this as well. I actually want to see what's happening at that point. So, as you can't see them and what's happening, then it's going to be scary. You still have to know how to direct these scenes.
mhm.
So it was very, very bland. Um, the opening scene was very generic with the exorcism, and I think this again comes down to me being maybe done with this stuff, unless they can do it really well and
Yeah.
just do something else with it, do something different. But again, it was very OTT, very in your face, rubbish CGI and kind of if there was makeup effects. But it's sort of ironic, isn't it? Because obviously we're praising the other two movies for the way they opened. They set out their stall very well. And this film set out its stall in probably the weakest possible way. probably this film is like, well, you sort of know these characters, so we'll just throw you in with this sort of generic type of scene. But for the first time, I actually thought, although I think they were good at some points, but I actually felt like Famiga and Wilson was winging it a little bit, like that, like we are here more for the paycheck. We maybe
Dialing in a bit.
didn't want to do. They did actually look like quite bored at times, and they weren't given a whole lot to do. About some of the other characters, because you obviously have this main sort of couple, and this, because the way it sort of starts off is you have this child who's like possessed, and the Warrens, that's like the case they're doing. But the way it works out is like the possession sort of moves on to, is it Arnie, the name of the character?
Artie or Arnie?
Babysitter, wasn't he? Something like that.
He was the boyfriend of the
Baby.
Was she the babysitter, or was she like? See, this is the thing. I can't even remember. Was she the babysitter, or was she like
maybe
the sister?
She was like, I think she was the sister.
Yes. So he was the boyfriend. Arnie. It's Arnie.
Arnie. Yeah. Right. So that becomes the plot where they think essentially all danger is past, because David, the brother, he sort of cured, but they don't realize it's passed on to Arnie. So then that becomes a plot where they then jump forward in time, and you have Arnie, who's in a relationship with, I think Debbie, her name was the girl, the sister, and again you're sort of jumping between the two plots. But what did you think about these characters?
Yeah, I I wasn't a massive fan of this one. I think I agree with what you're saying in that, or when you mentioned how dark it was. I was literally just talking about this with a friend like 2 days ago. How horror movies have started to do that. How movies in general have started to do that. It's like, no, we would actually like to see what's happening on the screen. That would be nice, considering that's the main form of when you watch the movie. You want to see what's happening. But I agree that the characters were not very engaging with this one. I think that the only reason that I enjoyed it really at all was because I still do think that even though they were not as good as the first two, that Vera and Patrick were still quite good in this one. That again, I really like the Warrens and their relationship. I really like that. I thought it was interesting when they gave Ed the heart attack and they had him have health problems, and they were showing how that was affecting their work, and how I really, really loved the build-up where he kept forgetting his pills, and then right at the end, she had it in her locket. I thought that was such a great moment for their relationship, to show how she thinks of him, and how they've been married for so long and she knows him so well that she knew that he would do this again, so she came prepared. I thought that was a great character moment. But I did feel in this one, so with the first two movies, they move in with the families, they connect with the families, they become friends with the girls. They didn't really have that with this one. They didn't feel like they had that personal connection to the victim that they have always had, and I felt that detracted from the film a lot. The first two were hauntings, like traditional house hauntings, but this felt like it was almost like a murder mystery, just with supernatural elements. Like it was very much about the Warrens going to the woods and investigating and going to the police and finding out what they knew. There wasn't a lot of one-on-one time with the actual victims, and I think that really detracted, because obviously we go and we see these for the horror, but a good horror movie will have good characters, will have good dynamics, will have good characterization. And the first two movies had that, but this one just didn't. And then because it didn't have that, then the fact that the horror elements were like kind of crap, for want of a better word, they were just not great. It's like you said, the opening scene to this one was nowhere near as strong as the opening scenes to the other two were. I think there was too much going on. We had the kid having the visions of the blood and the shower, and then they were exercising him on the table, and then the other guy was possessed, and it was just it was just so much. It was almost like we jumped in at the climax of the movie at the beginning, because it was like we're in the middle of a full. I have to admit, even though it was a bit on the nose, I did like that shot that very clearly mirrored The Exorcist. of the priest arriving at the house, and he stands and he looks at the house, and it's very
Okay.
obviously supposed to be an exorcism. I always appreciate little horror shout outs whenever you can tell a horror movie's trying to pay homage to another horror movie. But no, this one was,
Okay.
yeah, I didn't feel attached to any of the characters except the Warrens. And I don't think that it's like you said, I don't think this director really knew what to do with the horror elements in the
Yeah.
movie. I think when he was doing the murder mystery stuff, that came along a lot better. But the horror elements were really, yeah, they just weren't great. And I didn't like the climax with the witch or the demonic the chick who was summoning the demons. I thought that was a really weird and not great climax with Ed being like possessed and trying to like attack Lorraine, and then she was down there with the altar and they're trying to destroy the altar, and it was weird. They didn't really give a good explanation for her motivations.
Yeah, because they were trying to like draw parallels between them and the younger couple, and it just was never that convincing. We never really cared about the younger, because Arnie in particular I thought was a very just bland character.
I agree.
I never really believed in him. I thought he came across as quite sort of phony and never really convinced me as that character. And Debbie, we didn't get to know enough anyway. She was sort of sidelined
at all. So and
So it's
therefore it
hard
made
to
her
know.
motivations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's like you said, they were trying to parallel the younger couple with the Warrens, except the younger couple you didn't really feel like the whole time I was like, why is she still with him? Like, what is so deep and wonderful about their relationship that she would stand by him through all of this?
Yeah.
Like, it didn't come across as believable to me. It was just like, you're trying so hard to convince me that like they're so in love and they want to be together, that she would overlook this possession. Like when he took the demon from the kid and said, possess me instead, I was like, we haven't spent enough time with these characters to understand why he would sacrifice himself for this little kid. It all happens within the first 10 minutes of the film. So what should be this big heroic sacrifice that should make you like this character and think this character is such a great character just kind of falls flat, because we don't know these characters yet. Like, we've literally spent 10 minutes with them and you're throwing this big plot point in. I feel like they needed more build up to that. They needed more build up of the kid being possessed, and then Arnie taking the spirit into himself. And if they'd spent a bit more time establishing the family and establishing those characters, then I think there would have been a better payoff at the end when they finally free him from the possession.
Script and just the pacing and the way the story was like grown, it was just very repetitive. I mean, it was almost like the sort of structure was plot exposition, lots of plot exposition, and then a scare, and it would just follow that pattern. And there was too much talking, too much plot exposition. That was just very on the nose, even though obviously certain points were done quite well, and you had at least some good actors in there. I mean, it was nice seeing John Noble pop up.
But when he pops up, you always know something's going down.
Yeah.
he's almost like a walking spoiler. You see him and you're like, oh, shit's about to get real.
But yeah, he at least gives a bit of oomph to, that sort of side of things. But even with that plot, they sort of went a bit cliche with like the twist with his daughter, and not that I guessed it, but I'm not surprised they went with it.
No, and that's kind of it. It's like you might not have seen it coming, but when it was revealed, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, okay, because it just kind of like you're like, oh yeah, no, that works, as opposed to a big, oh, I didn't see that coming kind of moment. So yeah, I agree. This one was just, it was a pity, because the first two, I really liked the first two so much, and this one was just. It was just a letdown, and if we hadn't had Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, it just wouldn't. Like, I don't think there would have been anything. Yeah, it would have just disappeared as like another generic kind of horror movie.
Things there's one or two decent moments of comedy. Like I like the stuff, because they obviously do bring back characters who have been there all along. I forget the name of, but obviously the guy who works with them, who's been in every film. The one with the glasses.
Yeah, no, I know who you're talking about, because I know the actor from a couple of other things, but his name has just gone straight out of my head.
Because there was a couple of funny moments with him and like the cop, and them sort of in a bit of banter. So I quite enjoyed those moments. But there's one or two moments, but overall it's very bland and forgettable. And
Yeah,
the
definitely.
cardinal sin boring because like even if it had been bad but entertaining, at least that would have something to take away from it. But
Very true.
the
But yeah, no,
cardinal
you're right.
sin is to be boring, really,
Yeah,
and I
for
think
any
it's
movie that's bad.
boring.
For a horror movie, that's like doubly bad because it's like the one type of movie that you want to go in and have your adrenaline going the whole time and be engaged and excited. So yeah, when you have a boring horror film, it's so much worse than a bad film. At least a bad film you can make fun of, or you can enjoy the cheesiness, or you can enjoy, just the badness. But when it's boring and it just doesn't really do anything for you.
A couple of cheesy moments aren't there as well. I thought the stuff with it being their love that saved them, like as in the
Yeah.
Warren. I thought that was way too cheesy.
And again, it was like if you compare it to the second movie where they very much do play on their relationship, but it's done in like a much more organic kind of way, and it's not so much like their love that saves them as it is just the strength of their belief in each other and their determination not to let anything happen together. But yeah, no, this one, yeah, I did find that cheesy and kind of out of place for a kind of a horror film of her being like, Ed, remember us, remember who I am. They had like those flashbacks of them at like the carousel, and I was just like, what is this? This is not a romantic comedy. This is a horror film. Why are you showing us scenes like that? It was it was cheesy. And again, it's a bit of a pity because this relationship they've done it so well in the previous two movies. They managed to show this loving married couple without leaning on those kind of like cheesy tired tropes. And then this movie, it just got really, I don't know what happened. Like as you said, maybe it was the director. I mean, because James Wan was a producer on this one, so he did at least have a bit of a hand in it. But yeah, the direction was not great. The script was not great. It's like you said, there were some really weird pacing issues, and it just felt very disjointed. I felt like sometimes we were just kind of moving from scene to scene to scene with like no logical explanation for why we were moving from scene to scene to scene. It's like they just wrote down, we're like, okay, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. And then they just didn't think of how to actually make it cohesive. So it was just like, okay, now we're in the woods, now we're investigating, now we're back in the jail, now he's trying to kill himself. Now it was just like, there was no, they hadn't really thought anything out. They wanted to make a new Conjuring movie, and it felt like it was rushed. Like they didn't take the time with it that they did with the first two.
Group of people who think that this is like the best one. And I'm assuming they're people who maybe aren't that invested in the first place. I mean, I saw, a critic I listen to and really respect and like, who's actually a big horror critic. But I think maybe his feelings on the films are that all three are kind of generic, but then they have their moments. So maybe that's where he's coming from. But I just find it strange. Even if you have issues with the other films, I just find it kind of strange that anyone would think this is. Again, maybe they're not heaping praise on it. Maybe they're saying, in a way, we're not that high on the others, so this is slightly better. But I just find that a bit odd.
No, it's a bit odd. That definitely is weird.
Yeah. So,
all right. So if we were rating them, all right. Okay. So first movie, what would you rate the first movie?
I'll give it 7 out of 10. I think it's a good movie. It's not a great movie. It's a good introduction to the franchise. And obviously the acting is a high standard. I like that family in the first movie. The scares are hit and miss, but there's enough good scares to make it a decent horror. So 7.
I'd probably go with, I think the last time I rewatched it, I gave it 8.5. Because I think it's got some elements to it that just make me, I think, a bit more biased to begin with. So haunted house, check. Set in the 70s, check. Good dynamics and characters, check. So for me, all of that kind of makes it a little bit more enjoyable than if it was just like more of a generic horror film. I don't know. The last time I rewatched this film, I found myself really engrossed and I didn't look away from the screen, which to me is always a mark of a great movie. The only reason I wouldn't rate it like 9 or 10 is because I do think there are some parts that are a bit generic, and then the climax just drags too
Yeah.
much for me, and because of that, it kind of ruins a little bit of my enjoyment of the rest of the film. But like I said, just some of the elements that I really enjoy, I think, just make me a little bit more biased and maybe rank it higher than it probably deserves. Like if I was going on a purely technical level, I might just give it a 7. But like as an enjoyment level and just
Okay.
me personally, I go 8.5 for that one.
Okay. So what would you rank number 2, which obviously we
So
both
I think number 2 on a technical level is probably better than number 1, but on an enjoyment level, I like it just a little bit less. So I'd probably go with an 8 for number 2. I think it was really solid. I think as far as sequels go, it's one of those sequels that can stand next to the original and be just as good. Like we said, I really like the change of setting. And the only reason I rank it a little bit less is because the last time I rewatched, I just happened to enjoy the first one a little bit more than the second one. So yeah, a little bit lower for me. What about you?
I actually agree with the rating. I go with an 8. Obviously, it's for me,
Yeah.
it's more of a positive and a step up because
Yeah.
obviously I was a bit lower on the first one. But
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I think it does exactly what a sequel needs to do. It builds on the mythology. I really like that stuff. I think that
Yeah.
maybe added to the stakes and maybe actually made it a bit more interesting than the first film. And yeah, the scares were more consistent, I'd say, more
Yes.
creepy. Some really good stuff.
Yes.
Not
Oh,
perfect, one or two
no.
moments, but overall, yeah, a good horror movie. So 8,
Number 3.
masterpiece.
Look, I'd probably give it a 5 out of 10. I think it was very average. I liked the Warren stuff. I thought some of the stuff was okay, but nothing spectacular. Not so bad that I'd rate it really low, but definitely very, very average. So 5. 5 is good for me.
Okay,
What about you?
see, yeah, I'm sort of wondering if I went back and maybe it might improve, but no, 4 out of 10. It's,
No,
I think it's a movie.
it was
Very
not great.
stuff. Even the Warren stuff, I wasn't that into in this film. I agree, it was maybe the stronger stuff, but
Yeah.
as I said, I think maybe the actors were a bit more. We're here for the paycheck sort of thing,
Yeah.
or we're not invested in this one. So yeah, 4 out of 10. So
Oh.
we're pretty
So
similar overall.
yeah, it
Yeah.
looks like I think it's just this genre in particular I just really love haunting. So I tend to rate haunting films that like are set around haunted houses a little bit higher. But I think overall, yeah, similar and I think on a technical level we'd agree that we'd agree on ratings as far as technical level goes. But just a really enjoyable franchise, I think. The first 2 movies
Yeah.
are just really great. I love James Wan. I think he's great. He's an Australian, which is like an added bonus. So
Yeah,
that's very cool. And I think he did a great job with the first 2. And yeah, I think that it was a mistake to not bring him back or have him direct the third one. But I do also wonder how he would have gone directing the third one because the story is so different. Like the first 2 have very similar stories and follow very similar structures, and this would have been a completely different type of story. And so it would have been interesting to see what he would have done with it if he had come back to direct. I don't know that he could have saved the movie. The script itself was not a strong script. So
yeah.
there's only so much you
That.
can do with a
It's
bad
hard
script.
to. Enjoyable franchise, I would say overall. Not one of my favorites. Not one I'm that invested in. But I think just as a hardcore horror fan, we enjoy going back to these things.
Yeah.
As long as they're not, like totally bad. But there's a lot. Well, unless they're entertaining bad. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
distinction. But in this case, for the most part, in the first 2 films, the quality is sort of there, and there's plenty to enjoy. And obviously, you've got a set of like 2 really good main characters that carry a lot of the drama. So I would have a decision on the third one whether I ever want to watch it again because it was just really boring. But it might be one of those where if it's in the set, maybe I might.
Yeah.
Who knows? I might feel a bit differently. But the first 2 definitely I would watch again.
Yes. Oh, very good.
That's the Conjuring franchise.
Hmm.
So, yeah, do you want to say something?
So yes, so next week we will be starting the Halloween films because we're
Okay.
going to do a lead up to the release of Halloween Kills, which will be out in October. So I believe we will start with the original 1978 film, which I actually haven't watched in a very long time because it scares the crap out of me. So this will be very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, the little known Halloween film, which I'm sure no one has ever heard of or seen. So that'll be next week. I did a long time ago make a start on those. I did about the first four, but Rachel's here now, so it makes sense for us to go back to the very beginning. Many highs and lows. I mean, the franchise really goes places over the
It's a roller
I
coaster,
think
the
it's
Halloween
11 years.
franchise.
But we're going to build up to the next one, so the new one in October. So that starts next week. So I mean, get watching the original Halloween for next week. So before we go, Rachel, do you want to promote your channel again?
Yes, as always, you can just find me at Rachel McDonald, YouTube, video essays on all sorts of topics, mostly TV, but please follow me over there. And you can also follow me on Tumblr and Twitter. The links are to both are on my channel. So definitely come and
Yeah.
follow me if you want video essays.
Very good. And you can find me on Twitter at Keith Beard. You can follow me on Letterboxd, which is this thing where you can rank movies, every movie you see. It's a really fun site. Bookhouse Boy 1980, I am on there. And before we go, I'll just promote a couple more things on the channel, both sort of related to horror in a way. And that is, first of all, every Thursday I host a quiz stream, a live stream on the channel. And at the moment, I happen to be doing horror, so that's a good sort of tie-in and sort of a 3 or 4 parts. So last week I did supernatural movies. This week I'm doing slashers, so that's quite fitting because the Halloween review is on the way. It's funny how these things work
Work
out.
out.
So this coming Thursday, I mean, just look out for it. I mean, it's 10:45 UK time, so obviously just look out for the live stream. But we do multiple choice questions, different categories, and slasher movies is the theme for the quiz this week. So that's fitting. And also something I do, which is a TV thing, is I review the X-Files, which I've been doing from the very beginning. And I'm on to season 2 now, quite early into season 2. And that I think that ties in quite nicely with some of this other stuff because at times a very scary show, The X
Yes.
Files, very iconic. So if you want to jump in on those reviews, you can do. I'm on season 2, as I said, so look out for The X Files. You an X Files fan?
I have seen some of it. I love any 90s TV show, but it was kind of one of those shows that I wasn't really allowed to watch as a child, so I didn't get to see much of it. I have seen all of season 1 and I've seen bits and pieces of episodes here and there. So definitely a show that I will eventually sit down and watch when I actually have the time, because I did really like it. And of course, everyone loves Mulder and Scully and their dynamic, which pretty much carries the show. So I will definitely check in on some of those reviews.
Very good. So you can find those on the channel. So that's us done. Next week will be Halloween, the original. Like and
Ooh.
subscribe as always. Share it out, and we'll see you guys again soon. Thanks.
See you
And
guys later. Bye.